Today, we're joined in hour two by Sarah Montalbano, who is I would say she's the education correspondent. She's the lead education researcher over there at the Alaska Policy Forum. And we're going to talk about the state of the state education, which is, again, has been a hot button issue for me for years. And I'm a little frustrated, in case you couldn't tell. A little frustrated. We're going to jump into it now with Sarah, and we're going to get her take on everything that's going on. Let's jump over and bring her on board this morning to start that discussion. Sarah Montalbano, I hope I'm not murdering your name there on that.
It's Montalbano, but it's close.
Montalbano. Okay. Well, just don't call me late for supper. That's all I can say here this morning. Sarah, you've been doing, you do a lot of articles over the Policy Forum website at alaskapolicyforum.org talking specifically about education. So I guess first and foremost, hit me with the street cred. Where are you coming from? Who are you? And, why should I be listening to you when you write things out on the internet there? Tell us what's going on.
I appreciate that. People don't ask that too often. So I just graduated Montana State University with a bachelor's in computer science, so I'd like to think I'm pretty good at data analysis and things like that. To comment on Alaska education, I feel qualified because I went through the public schools. I went through the Mat-Su-Borough School District. I was born and raised in Wasilla my whole life. And that's something that I think numbers actually lend a lot of important information to this discussion, where it's not just emotions, and you obviously don't care about kids if you're talking about these things. So I think the numbers are revealing.
Yeah, no, exactly. That is the thing that gets me. Anytime you talk about education, you immediately hear somebody from the back of the room cry, but don't you care about the children? And of course, yes, of course we care. That's why we're trying to have a discussion, is because we care about the children. This is not just a dollars and cents argument. This is, hey, we want to know what's going on. If it was just about the children and we were throwing all this money at it and we were acing it and we were somewhere near the top of the pack, this conversation would probably not be part of the thing here. We would be all okay with it. The problem is we've dumped ever increasing amounts of money into this system, and yet it continues to drop further and further. And we're 49th in what, science or reading? We're 48th, 49th, 47th. We're right down there at the bottom, and yet we spend a tremendous amount. In fact, that's the first thing I want to talk about. Your article from this month about Alaska's Education Freedom Report Card on spending was, well, let's just say it was eye-opening, to say the least. Give us some of the stats here. Let's talk a little bit about school spending in the state of Alaska.
Sure. Yeah. So the Heritage Foundation put together a report of all 50 states and DC, ranking them on 4 categories: transparency, regulatory freedom, spending, which we'll talk about first, and school choice issues. Alaska ranked 47th nationwide for high spending. And the way that they calculate this is basically looking at the per pupil spending, which is very, very high. It's about $18,000 per student here in Alaska. And then looking at the outcomes, which are absolutely atrocious. We've, on the 2022 National Assessment of Education Progress that came out in October, we were 49th in 4th grade reading nationwide. So we're not getting a lot of bang for our buck.
Right, not getting a lot. I just mentioned it during when I had Ben on, is that I remember when Sarah Palin was governor, that one of the big sticking points was that graduation rates were at 72 or 73%, and we're going to fix that. And we did. We got all the way up to 76% today. Those 3 or 4 percentage points were huge, but that still means that 1 in 4 students don't graduate. And for what my understanding is that many of these students who do graduate, they have to take remedial math to be able to even go into college, because they don't have enough math to be able to understand a 100 level college math class. That's $18,000 a student every year for 15 years. You're talking about, we've just spent $1.5 million on this kid, or whatever it is. I butchered the math there. Obviously, I'm a product of the system, but we spent all this money, and yet $150,000 on these kids, and we can't figure out how to get them to teach math or to learn or to graduate or whatever. There's something fundamentally broken here.
Absolutely. I'd have to look up the exact statistics, but the University of Alaska conducted a study back in 2013 or 2014 that shows about 70% of students have to take some sort of remedial class when they entered the University of Alaska system.
Yeah, I mean, it's tremendous, and
Crazy.
that's not, yeah, I mean, especially for kids who were just freshly minted and graduated, that seems like an extraordinarily high number. So you had a quarter that didn't even make it, and then 20% of the residual have to take remedial classes. I mean, that's an astonishing number based on how much we're spending on this situation. And where's the, people are like, well, fine, where's the money going to? And you hit a tremendous statistic in here, something that we've been talking about for a long time, because I saw a graph, and I have it, I'm not going to throw it up, but there's a graph that shows it's two diverging data points. One is the enrollment, and the enrollment is continually going down. It's a graph going down. And on the other side is the overhead and the employee count, the administrative employee count at most of these school districts. And it's a divergent cone. I mean, one's going down, one's skyrocketing up. And you point out that that's a big problem because we've got a whole lot of people who are not in the classroom teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. The Heritage Foundation looked at data from 2018 and 2019, I believe. And they found the ratio of teachers to non-teachers was 0.79. For every 4 teachers, there are 5 non-teachers in Alaska public schools. The teachers are outnumbered.
Absolutely. And that's been a continuous problem, right? I mean, it's a growing problem. It's not something this is not something that's brand new. This has been happening over the last decade. And that's where a lot of that stuff is being eaten up. And speaking of the BSA, the way the BSA is factored is that it favors the buildup of administration versus dollars going to the classroom. Am I wrong?
I believe that's true. School funding formulas are a little complicated, and I won't pretend that I'm an expert on that quite yet. But absolutely, administrative staff have been increasing. This is a nationwide problem. This isn't unique to Alaska. And an interesting report that we've summarized on the Alaska Policy Forum website is a report by the Reason Foundation, K-12 education spending spotlight. And we see, in Alaska, revenues went up 32% from 2002 to 2020 after adjusting for inflation. And so we see continual increases in education funding. Most of that is going to support services and administration.
So 20%, and I love me some Reason Foundation stuff. Corey DeAngelis is a friend of the show, and he's been on several times to talk about this. But so a 20% increase in revenues for school systems, for the school overall education system since 2002 in the last 20 years. But that's not what I hear in the newspaper, Sarah. What I hear in the newspaper is that we don't care about children because we've only bumped the BSA 4%, not the 17% that inflation has hit us with. So we obviously don't care. Again, no mention of any of these other funds, no mention of the 20% increase in the last 18 years.
Mm-hmm. And we look at that, we've got 32% revenues up overall, and then K-12's total support services growth has gone up 50% per student. So it's really remarkable to look at this and think about the incentives in the funding formula, if that's correct, that incentivize administrators over teachers, and they're taking resources from the classroom.
Right. Do you have, and it's not mentioned in your article, or if it was, I missed it, do you have an actual notation on how much of these dollars actually make it into the classroom as a percentile of each dollar?
I don't think so. If we break it down, the Heritage Foundation doesn't have this, but there's another report on our website that I just mentioned that I'm going to pull up and see if I've got that number right off the top of my head.
Because I know Sarah Vance came in and said, she said it's like 47% from the numbers that she saw make it into the classroom in K-12. In the university, it's even worse. Only like 15% of the dollars make it into the classroom at the university level, which is astounding to me. I mean, this is supposed to be about the students. It's supposed to be about education. And if only half in the K to 12 and only 15% in higher ed is actually making it into the classroom, somebody's got some explaining to do.
Yeah, I don't think I have that number off the top of my head, but it would not surprise me whatsoever if that was the case. One of the big points on this report that we did about the Reason Foundation, the benefits are growing enormously by, over 100% from 2002 to 2020. And what we see is that teacher salary, instructional salary barely went up. It went up 1% or something like that. While, support services salaries and benefits are growing at the same time. So it's really remarkable that teachers, they're probably right that they're not getting raises, they're not getting paid the way that they should be. But that is not because there's not enough funding available. It's that it's all going to administrative work.
Right, and overhead and things like that. That I think would shock most Alaskans if they understood that. If they understood that component of it, that the teacher salaries and benefits and their gravy train went up 1%, and yet we see a 32% increase in 18 years overall in educational spend. That's astonishing. And now, because of inequity for teachers, now we're talking about something even bigger. We were just talking about this with Representative Carpenter, which is the retirement system and the retention system. And you make some comments on that, which I want to get to here in just a second, but we're gonna have to take a break, unfortunately. We're going to continue with Sarah Montalbano. I hope I didn't kill her. I got it. She nodded. I got it right. All right. So we're going to continue with her here in just a second. And we're going to keep her, if she's willing to stay, we're going to keep her for the whole hour because I think she's got some juicy stuff here, baby. We're going to talk about that. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We return with Sarah Montalbano from the Alaska Policy Forum. We're talking education all morning long. Back with more right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes,
allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
We're in the break right now with Sarah Montalbano from the Alaska Policy Forum. Sarah, I'll be honest with you, you lay out a lot of this stuff here, and I don't know if it's because the APF stuff is off in a corner of the internet that nobody's paying attention to, but I'm surprised you haven't gotten some death threats over some of the stuff that you're putting out there, some of these hard truths and facts, because when you read through this, and you have columns that go back for quite a while here talking about education. This is some shocking stuff. And it would seem that if parents were more educated about this and got more involved and educated themselves on the issues, this could be a self-healing problem. But it's just like people are not paying attention. They see the headlines and they go, "Oh yes, we need more education funding because obviously we don't care about the children if we don't," and that's kind of shocking.
It is, and I would love if parents would involve themselves in the nitty-gritty of these numbers, because I think they're very revealing about the state of Alaska's education system.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me see here. I'm going into the chat room, see if there's any kind of commentary. Oh, Brian, thank you. Brian dropped the link to the reason.org spending spotlight, which is good. Which reminds me, we need to have Corey DeAngelis back on the program here. We haven't talked to him in quite a while, but he's the same kind of thing, just dropping the truth bomb on people and watching people lose their mind. Donna Arduin, former OMB director of the state of Alaska, 6,000 BSA per student, 18,000 per student in the system, 26,000 per educated student. Ow. Ow. Ow, because that 18,000, that's outside the BSA, right?
That sounds like it.
Yeah. So, I mean,
Yeah.
this whole thing, Well, the amount of money just boggles the mind. I mean, look, I'm a homeschooling parent. We've homeschooled. My youngest now is 17. My oldest is 28. We homeschooled all 5 of those kids inside of the IDEA system here in the state of Alaska. And I mean, we got nowhere near that amount of money. High schoolers got like $4,000 or something like that, and the grade schoolers got it was $2,700, $28,000, $3,000 or something for the entire school year. And we did pretty good. We did okay. I mean, these kids are, they haven't gone out to become rocket scientists, but they're educated, they're happy, they're healthy, they can hold a reasonable conversation, they can do math, they can read a book. I mean, I think that's kind of a success as far as that goes. And I look at the amount of money being spent in the brick and mortar, and this is a nationwide problem, right, Sarah? This is not strictly an Alaska problem, although we are an extreme case of it. I mean, we've got a problem across the country with our educational, especially when you start looking at international standards. We ain't doing so hot.
No, we aren't.
We just lost Sarah there. We'll see if she jumps back on board here in just a second. We just lost our connection to her, so we'll see if she can jump back in here and be part of it. Let me see. Kim said last year the KPBSB, the Kenai School Board, gave administrators at central office an 8 to 11% raise and a $9,000 bonus for a few because they took on extra duties. Ow, that's not what we need right there. All right, sorry about that, Sarah. It was a quick disconnect, and we're ready to go. If you want to, no, that happens. So again, this is an international, in the international scope, this is not just an Alaska problem. This is a national problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a few states that have bucked that trend. So if we look at the Reason report again, Indiana increased 0%. From 2002 to 2020, after adjusting for inflation. Idaho went down 3%. So there are states that are making this work, doing more with less. And Alaska is really one of the higher spending, higher increasing states. When we look, we're up against New York and Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, places like that are on the East Coast spending a lot of money per student. And we have to think about, too, that the variance across all of our districts are really large. There are some districts that are doing well with a pretty low amount of money comparatively, and then there are districts that are needing $40,000, $50,000 per kid. It's really remarkable the degree of problems we're seeing.
Here we go, the Michael Dukes Show.
Sure.
Annette Funicello. All right, welcome back to the program, the Michael Dukes Show. We're continuing now with Sarah Montalbano from the Alaska Policy Forum, talking about education. And we were just talking about how, this is not strictly an Alaskan problem. Alaska obviously has got some bigger issues than most states, especially since we consistently spend more and end up in the bottom. But, nationally, across the entire U.S., our educational achievement compared to other developed nations is, we used to be in near the top, and then it kind of fall in the middle, and now we're just kind of down there in the mess zone, yet we continue to spend a lot of money. And I think part of the problem is, Sarah, is that people are, they refuse to say that potentially there's a problem. Potentially there's something broken in the system. So all we need to do is just throw more money at it, and it will eventually work. It's kind of like communism. If we just throw more money at it, it will eventually work. But what we're seeing is, no, it's not working. And that's the bigger issue.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that other developed nations are really pointing out to the United States at this point, is that throwing more money at this isn't helping whatsoever. There's some attitudinal shifts that needed to be made that are going to be really critical culture in respecting education and what it can do for kids. I think that's one of the big things that is a huge scope problem. I can't pretend that I can fix it, but it's something we need to talk about if we're talking about differences in other countries versus the United States.
You talk in your article back in December, you talk about one of the other pillars of this Heritage Report, which is the regulatory freedom. I was just talking about what happened in Virginia back in November when the Terry McAuliffe and many of the other luminaries inside the government basically told parents, shut up and sit down. You don't decide what your kids are being taught. We do. Which led to a huge backlash in Virginia, and that was kind of an outlier because usually they're very quiet. They don't say the quiet part out loud, you know. But that's kind of the attitude. Is basically we're the experts, you're not. Shut up and sit down. We'll tell you what's best for your kids, and you'll like it because you're paying for it already, so you'll like it. So tell us a little bit about the regulatory aspects of the Heritage Report.
Sure. Alaska ranked 31st in regulatory freedom, so solidly middle of the pack, nothing too remarkable. What we see is it's ranked on several different pieces. The degree of barriers to entering the teaching profession, that's really important, that when you have a lot of state regulations on teacher licensure, you're blocking talented individuals who probably should be allowed to enter the profession with serious monetary and non-monetary hurdles, like you're going back to college or I have to take a certain number of credits or classes to get my license. The next thing is the presence of chief diversity officers in school districts. There's a few important caveats to this one, but the Heritage Foundation looked at school districts over 15,000 students, and since there's only 2 of those in the state of Alaska that they found, that means the Anchorage School District, the highest, must have something that they've considered a chief diversity officer. And then finally, the Heritage Foundation looks at whether the state has a Common Core testing requirement of some sort. And Alaska actually did well for this because we never really adopted the Common Core standards, and we're not using those aligned tests. So we have more local control of education.
So that's good news for Alaskans, is that we are more of a middle of the road friendly regulatory environment. But could we do better?
Absolutely. The big one is barriers to teaching. There's 0% of Alaska teachers coming to the classroom from non-traditional means, which means all of them are coming through teachers' colleges. And teachers' colleges have a few big problems, but mostly that teachers aren't really being taught their subject. They're being taught how to teach. And that's a different thing. And so we don't have teachers necessarily that are masters of their craft and masters of their subject. They've just learned these teaching techniques that may or may not apply. And then there's so much variance too with what is being taught in teachers' colleges that I don't see any reason why teachers or prospective teachers wouldn't be allowed to just sit down and take a test, and that they don't have to go through all these arduous, certification processes, competency exams, preparation programs. That's another word for go through a college course or 4 years. So I would really think that we should, first of all, to alleviate the teacher shortage, which is nationwide, not just Alaska, but we should be making things easier for teachers.
Right. Well, and I've heard some stories, is anecdotally, not firsthand, but talk to people who are like, well, my wife was a teacher from somewhere else and she's been trying to get a job here, but it's nearly impossible because she can't get in the door. And they're supposed to allow the teaching certificate like a temporary 1 year, and then they can extend it. But then you got to jump through a bunch of hoops and everything. If you're having such a hard time getting teachers, you'd think that if you've got a teacher who's certified with experience, even if it's from another state, you'd go, okay, you must be okay. And like you said, give them some kind of basic, not a college course, but just a competency test to say, can you do it? And then put them in the system. But it just seems like it's nearly impossible. One guy told me here last week, he said, yeah, my wife was certified, everything else. She's been a substitute teacher. And the district person told her, well, you'll never get hired as a full-time teacher if you're a substitute teacher, because we like what you're doing. And just like, wait a second, she's trying to get hired full time and she's got all the things that you need. You'll take her as a substitute, but you won't take her as a full-time teacher. What is the problem?
That's such a shame, because we really have talented people from other states that want to move to Alaska, and that they're not able to. And this is a problem across various professions, that they have to get relicensed in this state. And, Alaska doesn't make it easy. You said, there's a 1 year certificate further out-of-state license, but then to extend it up to 3 years, you need to take a competency exam, you need to take a preparation program within a year, and then within 2 years you need to complete 3 semester hours of an approved Alaska Studies course and 3 semester hours of an approved multicultural course. This is a cost, that's 6 credits of university costs that they need to take to find these classes. And it's just ridiculous to me that people are being told that, well, you're good enough for another state, but you're not good enough for Alaska, so we're going to make you jump through hoops.
Let's talk about the big elephant in the room. I mean, as we've been talking about, BSA obviously has been the big talking point in the newspapers, but now we're seeing more and more discussion on the retention and how, because we don't have a good pension program, and we've got a defined benefit or a defined contribution plan, but it's not good enough. We need a defined benefits program, some kind of gold-plated thing that will attract teachers from everywhere, and they can get vested in and then move out, or whatever. What are your thoughts? What does the research show on not just the teacher salaries, but on the benefits and the retentions and the retirements?
That's an interesting question that we're going to be looking at further. So go to alaskapolicyforum.org and subscribe to our newsletter if you'd like to find out more once we've done solid research on this.
That was the tease. That was the tease. We call that the tease.
Look, yes. Yeah. It's really important, though, because we are going to be looking at this in depth. First of all, the state needs to be able to pay off its pension liabilities if it needs to. And so unfunded pension liabilities are pretty high in the state of Alaska. I think in 2015 we paid down a lot of it, but it still totals $1.86 billion that the state owes retired teachers. And that's really remarkable. What I've heard on the teacher retention side, and I would have to go find the source for this, but the pension benefits aren't nearly as important as upfront increases in salaries. And one of the things that pensions are difficult, that there's kind of a curve where at the beginning you're not so interested in pensions, but then once you're really close to retirement, pensions suddenly really matter
right.
as a teacher. And so that's one of the things that we can help restructure pensions to make it easier. First of all, pensions are really, this is an exciting topic. Pensions are hard to move around.
Right.
So if you're trying to move school districts, that suddenly becomes more of an issue. So it's not so portable. And that's really, pensions aren't really working for teachers. And it's not that it needs to be a defined benefit plan. Defined benefit plans are extremely risky financially for the state, and they wouldn't make all that much of a difference in teacher retention.
Right. Well, I mean, and it's proven that they're risky for the state. That's why we still have a $7 billion unfunded liability to the defined benefits programs, of which $1.8 billion is going to the TERS system, the teacher system as well. The other part of it is the PERS system. And going back to that, seems when you say risky, I mean, I think that's an understatement at this point, because we've seen what's happened with that. So what do teachers, and there was another Reason report that I'm sure you read that talked about, are Alaskan teachers, well, it wasn't talking specifically about Alaska, it was talking about teacher pay in general. And Alaska's pretty good. I mean, we were in the upper echelon. We weren't in the top for sure, but it was pretty good. But when you start seeing that they're only getting increases of 1 or 2% versus the administrators getting a lot, getting a huge push, that might be part of the problem right there, wouldn't you say?
Sure. Yeah. And you have to remember that the benefits are what are increasing. You're not upfront changing the number that appears on a teacher's paycheck when you're adding to their pensions and their health insurance. And not that all that stuff's not important, but it's a lot less motivating because it's 20, 30 years in the future. And so I'm not familiar with the paper you're citing, but I do think that it's rather, it's a rather difficult assertion to make that, well, we need to pay teachers more, and then you plug it all into things that are way down the line.
Right, exactly. They have to see there has to be some immediacy in the benefit. It's very amorphous, that pie in the sky, 30 years from now, you'll thank me kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said,
assuming you stay with this district and this state long enough and you don't want to move anywhere,
exactly.
which is a really outdated perception of work.
Well, that's the first time that I've heard about, having a difficulty of moving inside the state of Alaska in the pen. So you can't, if you work in the Yukon-Koyukuk School District and you want to move into the Fairbanks School District, it becomes difficult to transfer your pensions around. Is this not a state mandate, or what's going on?
This is a statistics I've heard from national sources, so I'm not sure if it does apply to Alaska, but that is what I've heard, is that it becomes difficult to move through districts, and especially across states. I mean, if you spend your career as a teacher in Alaska and you want to move to Washington, that's, first of all, a lot of time and money that you put into this pension that is not so beneficial to you later.
Right. Sarah Montalbano is our guest. She is with the Alaska Policy Forum. She is their educational researcher. And is that your official title? Education
Policy Analyst, but that's essentially it.
Education Policy Analyst. And she has got a series of articles. If you haven't gone over to Alaska Policy Forum and clicked on the Education tab, you could see all the things that she's been working on, and it's quite a list of things as well. Now, you mentioned this Heritage Report had three things: the spending, the regulatory. What's the third leg of the Heritage Report that we need to talk about? We're going to do a tease for the next segment here.
Transparency.
Okay, so transparency. We're going to find out. And again, the word transparency reminds me of the whole thing in Virginia. Again, all of a sudden they said the quiet part out loud, which is, we're not going to tell you because we know better than you and we know what's going on. So this should be an interesting conversation. Sarah Montalbano is our guest, and we're going to be talking with her more. One final segment of the Michael Dukes Show. Back with more here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. We'll return with more right after this.
What is that?
Common sense. Regularly heard on American radio. Michael Dukes Show. Radio.
Okay, in the break right now with Sarah, and I failed to mention to Sarah, when you hear the ding like the ringside bell, that means we got 10 seconds to wrap up before we rejoin the radio, Sarah. So sorry about that. I meant to tell you that earlier. And, well, no, you had no idea. You just thought we were about to fight or something. It's like, put up your dukes and get going on with it. All right, so we're going to talk about transparency next here, and we can kind of go over that. And then we'll summate with what your thoughts are on this. And, I mean, I welcome your opinions on, how we fix this problem. But let me ask you this. In all the research that you're doing and the different reports that you're reading from Reason and Heritage and Cato and everybody else, what do you think would be one of the most shocking things that the average Alaskan, if they heard it in the wild, they would be like, what the actual, what do you, what is the most shocking thing you think that Alaskans would just absolutely sit straight up about as you look at all these numbers and these stats, especially in light of what the papers and the media is pushing forward right now?
I hate to say it, but that per pupil spending figure is really astounding, and there's some interesting work at EdChoice that shows that parents and the general public really underestimate how much is being spent. They say, yeah, it's about $4,000 per student, and then they get to show them the actual results. And for us, that's even a starker difference. We're spending $18,600. That's so much more than people expect. And then people begin to wonder, is that really what my tax dollars should be going to? Is this being used well? Is my child getting $18,000 worth of benefits from being in the public school system? So I think that statistic really floored me when I first learned it. And I think it manages to still be surprising.
Yeah, I will tell you that the one statistic that caught me and I think caused the most angst, no, maybe outrage in the chat room was your comment from your latest article here in January talking about the teacher to non-teacher ratio, where they found that there were 0.79 teachers for every non-teacher in Alaska's public schools. And to clarify, for every 4 teachers, there are 5 non-teachers in the public school. And that is mind-boggling in my mind.
Absolutely. It's really remarkable to think about. Teachers are outnumbered and we look at the increases in spending, and it's going towards adding one more administrator for every teacher you add. It's really remarkable. It floors me to think about that, but that's not unique. That is such a common thing across every school district in Alaska, pretty much across, nationwide school districts.
Right. I mean, I think back, I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I think back 35 years to when I was in high school, and I think about the number of teachers versus, administrators, counselors, whatever, and it was very small. I mean, it was a very small number it was probably at least 2 to 1 as far as administrators versus teachers. And we did pretty good back then. Our achievement was pretty darn good. And so it's gone completely in the opposite direction. And yet nobody seems to say, what were we doing back then that we're not doing today? That what, again, we refuse to admit that something is broken in the system, right? Just throw more money at it. That'll fix it. But that it's not fixing it.
No, all this money is just getting funneled and siphoned off, and it really frustrates me. And that's what I will say, aside from my policy think tank hard numbers hat, is that it's really frustrating to see these increases and then never see any increases in outcomes.
Well, and the fact that such a low percentage of the numbers of the money is actually getting into the classrooms where it's, I mean, this whole thing, if we're a factory and we're making not widgets, but we're making children, right? We're making educated children. And yet you've got, you've got a 25% rejection rate of your assembly line. They're just out the door. They don't make it. And the remainder 20% are defective enough that they can't even go to college. And I'm talking as an analogy here, folks. I'm not saying children are defective. All right. But if you're producing a product and it's that bad, and yet your overhead is eating up, you got 5 managers for every 4 workers on the assembly line. Something's wrong. Something is not, something is just fundamentally flawed. And until we can address that and acknowledge that, I don't see it being fixed. Do you?
I really don't. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to improve and reallocate these resources towards the teachers doing the work in the classrooms. And as much supervision as you'd like to do, as many support services, that's not a teacher getting in front of a classroom and teaching them how to read or do math. All of these things are perhaps worthy to pursue in themselves. Right. These various administrative support roles, some of it's surely useful, but a lot of it isn't the purpose of education.
The difference of nice to have versus must have, right? It would be nice to have all these things. And how much of that is because of the abdication of parental responsibility, right? Oh, we'll let the schools take care of it. We'll let them take care of it. We'll have this pre-stuff and all this other stuff because it's easy, right? I mean, that's what it all comes down to. All right. Absolutely. Transparency is going to be our topic as we jump into this, and we may talk a little bit about backpack funding if we have enough time. Sarah Montalbano is our guest, The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Well, how did we get here? I mean, geez, the fastest 2 hours in radio for sure. The Michael Duke Show. We're continuing now one final segment with Sarah Montalbano from the Alaska Policy Forum. She is the senior education analyst and researcher on education here in the state of Alaska. And she does some fantastic writing. If you haven't gone over to alaskapolicyforum.org and clicked on the education tab recently, you may want to do so. In fact, they got all kinds of good stuff over there at APF, but you probably want to go over there and take a look at education. If you want to get deeper into this topic, you can see what Sarah has been working on, and you get a feel for where we're at. And once you do, be prepared to be outraged, because there's a lot of hard facts in there that are just not making it into the reports of the mainstream media. I mean, we're just not seeing a lot of this hard numbers and this hard math going out there. And it's frustrating because people are making their decisions based on a headline, and they're making calls to their legislators based on what they read in the news instead of actually getting the stats. And I quite honestly, I think probably most legislators don't have the numbers or have been aware of the numbers that Sarah's bringing out there. So, Sarah, you were talking about the Heritage Report on Education. It's the Educational Freedom Report Card, and there were three aspects of it. One was the spending, one was the regulatory aspect, and the third was transparency. So tell us how Alaska did on transparency, and what does that translate to for common average folks out here? What does that mean?
Alaska ranked 29th in transparency. That is our highest rated section of this report card. There's a fourth section, school choice, that we'll be publishing fairly soon. We don't have a date set yet. But transparency is basically the right of citizens to know what the government is doing with their tax dollars. And it helps to hold elected leaders, school districts, and schools accountable for the decisions they're making with those tax dollars. So transparency is one of my favorite topics. It's really, really important for not only the general public, but for parents to be able to understand what's happening in classrooms and how is this money being spent.
And I think that's important to know. So Alaska ranks 29th. Do we have any details or stuff extrapolated from that?
Yeah, so there's several points. The level of parent access to curricula and materials was one of the categories Alaska did really well on because of the 2016 parental rights law. Among other things, that law means that parents must be provided with curricula for review, and parents have the opportunity to opt out of particular activities, classes, programs, or standards-based assessments too. So parents are able to actually review a lot of this curriculum.
And I think that's well and good, because I know that there was a big dust up and fervor from your alma mater, the Mat-Su School District here recently, where they had some educational components that they were talking about, including that I think was some of the CRT stuff, the 1619 project stuff that they were going to include in their curriculum, and the parents lost their mind with the school board, and they pulled it back on that. So I think that that's good. They didn't get the proverbial finger as they did in Virginia there for parents, and I think that that's good. That's a positive. So we're moving in one positive direction on that, although 29th out of 50 or 26th out of 50, still not great, but at least that's better than 49th, right?
Yeah, it's a lot better than the 47 we're posting and spending. It is our highest category, but still middle of the pack. One of the other things we did well on is state level requirements for public participation in meetings. And so that's one of the things that you get to show up to your school board meeting. You are afforded Alaska law affords the public not only a right to attend meetings of municipal bodies, but also a reasonable right to be heard at all regular and special meetings. So that's one of the things that we have going for us, is that you can show up to your school board meeting and be heard a lot of the time. It's covered by the municipal code. So that's something parents should keep in mind whenever something happens like that in the Mat-Su School District, which I didn't hear about, but I'm unhappy about.
And we're seeing some of these things, of course. I mean, there's a nationwide trend to move on to some of these things. It was the same thing with Common Core, right? It was a nationwide trend. Alaska dodged the bullet, I think in part because there was such a hue and cry from the populace about Common Core. We are engaged in a lot of ways, but I think it's good to be able to hold back and keep it to the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and stop with a lot of the extra stuff that they're trying to stuff into these curriculums. So good for us that we're at least up there in the middle high end of the pack on that kind of stuff. So this leads us to I do want to, because you touched on it and I mentioned it, the backpack funding, the school choice. I mean, whatever you call it, whether it's a voucher system or it's a backpack situation like Corey DeAngelis talks about, where the money just automatically follows the student. You don't have to have a voucher. You can just pretty much go where. I mean, this is pushing for a lot. But I think it's a trend, and it's been accelerated obviously by the pandemic and the learning pods and private schools and homeschooling and everything like that. I mean, where do you think we're going to go on that? Do you think that is part of the solution? I guess we should talk about solutions, and is that part of it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because Alaska has some legal things that preclude a lot of this backpack funding and education scholarship accounts. Those have been implemented in Arizona that will follow universally any child that wants to withdraw from the public school system, which is a really exciting development for Arizona students.
Right.
That would be wonderful if we could get something like that. I'm a big fan. I think it would really be, it would solve a lot of these problems if parents can move with their feet and not be having to pay twice for the public schools they're not using and the private or whatever school choice option that they're looking for. So that's something I really love.
Yeah, some kind of secondary choice. I mean, in Alaska, we've seen we were a charter family in the IDEA program, the Interior Distance Education from the Galena City School District. We were in their first, batch of kids, and it has been amazing. I mean, it was an amazing thing, and it was great, and we saw a surge after, because IDEA was really one of the first ones formed for these kind of distance correspondence schools. And we've seen a whole plethora of them come out. And now 25% of the students in the state are enrolled in some kind of correspondence or distance learning, whether that's from IDEA, Raven, or even from some of the school districts creating their own, because they saw the outflow and they're like, oh, we got to do something about this, right? But I think that's a trend that's just going to continue, don't you?
I do. And I think the correspondence school allotment program, where it gives you back some portion of this to use for educational expenses, that's a really unique program that is, I haven't heard anyone else nationwide doing this. And it really does spur school districts to improve when they're seeing their students, especially in rural areas, be siphoned off. And they see it as a real threat to their hegemony there. So I would like, if I may plug again, to invite all of your listeners to attend a webinar next Tuesday on the 24th. Does school choice help rural school districts, that we are going to be hosting with an expert from the Heritage Foundation. I think that would be of interest to all of your listeners, where we discuss absolutely that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you've got a Facebook link, make sure you send it to me, and I'll share it on the page so that people can do it. So, Sarah, we're down to the last 4 minutes here. So I'm going to ask you to take off your analyst hat for a second and just put on your other hat for advocation here and just say, how do we fix this? I mean, 47th in spending, middle of the pack in the regulatory, high middle of the pack in transparency. How do we fix what's broken in the state of Alaska right now?
Lots of different pieces to that. First of all, in transparency is where all of the rest of this comes from. If you don't know how much you're spending, you can't hold school districts accountable. So I'd really love to see school districts complying with Alaska's open records law, ensuring greater public participation in school board elections and things like that. As far as regulatory freedom, allow qualified teachers from other states to practice in Alaska, and just continue to reject the federalization of education, reject these federal funds with strings attached whenever possible. And then we need to reduce the unnecessary bloat in non-teaching and administrative staff. These dollars aren't going to the classroom, and that's why we're not seeing an improvement in outcomes. So that's what I see as the crux of it, is we need to have transparency so we know where these dollars are going. And once we know, we can start to really reallocate these to the classroom.
Right, absolutely. There's been several speculative solutions to some of these things, and I want to get your take on it here since we got a couple minutes. One is the discussion about, Alaska has 53 school districts. Now, for example, Hawaii has one school district for all the islands, for all the students. And I'm not advocating for a single Alaska school district. Obviously, geographically, there's cultural differences, there's many things. But there's been talk that if we just cut the number of school districts in half, let's just say we had 20 school districts instead of 53, that duplication of effort and what you were talking about, the administrative overhead and everything else, a lot of that would be eliminated, right? I mean, that could be a solution that we could look at.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem, and I haven't come to a conclusion, because there are some experts who say that, consolidating school districts into bigger and bigger student populations just means it's easier to get lost in the crowd, and you don't have as much voice in this education. I could see it helping in Alaska, though, so I have to reserve judgment until I've done a little more research on it, but I do think it's an interesting proposal.
Right. I mean, it's an idea, at least, consolidating consolidating all the different healthcare plans into a single plan, a statewide plan. I mean, that would be a huge, tremendous fix as well. and there's many others. Sarah Montalbano from the Alaska Policy Forum is our guest. Sarah, I know you've written an article that talks about the COVID monies going to the school districts, and
Yes.
that's kind of an eye-opener as well. I think I want to bring you back to talk about that, maybe for a
Love
whole
to.
hour. And then, obviously, the school choice, when your school choice report comes out from the Heritage Report, I would like to talk about that as well. So
Absolutely.
maybe we can do this again next week. I mean, education is going to be a huge deal this session, and I think we should be hammering this as much as we can. So if you're willing to come back on next week, I think we should do it again.
Yeah, shoot me an email. Let's do it.
Is it Montalbano Mondays? Is that what we should do? Should we do it Monday? Montalbano.
That'd be a lot of fun.
All right. Well, we'll work for that. Sarah Montalbano from the Alaska Policy Forum, thanks so much for coming on board today. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate all your help in understanding.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
All right. Hold the line for just a second, Sarah. Folks, we are out of time for today. Tomorrow, we got the top 3 with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Chris Story comes in for our little PMA boost and more. Be kind, love one another, live well. The Michael Duke Show. Sarah, I wanted to give you one final bite at the apple. You've been so good here about giving us a lot of good information. Is there, anything else you want to leave us with? Final thoughts, whatever. I hate being a slave to the clock, so I always want to give you a little bit of extra time here at the end in case there's something that we missed or didn't talk about that you think we should have hit on. I'll give you the floor here for a couple minutes here in case you need something else.
That's an awesome practice. I think the last thing I'd like to leave your viewers with is go participate in school board meetings. Go be an advocate for your kid because no one knows what they need better than you do. That's my overarching message. That is what drives me in working on this education stuff is you need to be able to steer this. So go participate.
Yeah, it's hard. I tell you, it's hard for me to get motivated since my kids are already homeschooled. I'm like, I don't even want to step into that mess, because, oh, man. I'm paying for it with my taxes and everything, but I'm just like, But it won't change if we don't get up there and make it change, right?
No, absolutely. And the people who care are the people who've gone to leave the system and who are able to say, I wash my hands of this and I don't want to fix it. But it's really important that motivated people take this and make it a problem for them.
Well, and that's a problem. And see, that's the tipping point. We're at 25% of students are in correspondence. What happens when it hits 30 or 35%? Then people wash their hands and walk away, and then the poor suckers who are still left in the system are like, do we even have enough pull to make a change? That's the problem. And so you're right. We still got to stay engaged on that. Sarah, next Monday, let's shoot for next Monday if you're available, because I really want to talk about this COVID funds and anything else that I can dig up from your archive while I got some reading to do. All
right. Well, thank you. I'll do my best to keep giving you new content.
I love it. I love it. Sarah Montalbano, she is our personal education expert here on the program for the Alaska Policy Forum, Senior Educational Analyst. Thank you for coming on board.
Thank you so much.
We'll talk to you again next week then. All right. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Have a great Monday. Thanks for being part of it today. All right, folks.